Hello and welcome to the Beaverton School District Budget Listening and Learning Session for 2022. My name is Mike Schofield. I'm the Associate Superintendent for Business Services, and I want to thank you in advance for your time and participation in the process. Our agenda for today includes going over our general fund budget, student investment account, federal coronavirus relief funds. We'll share some upcoming key dates, and then we'll talk about how you can provide some input and prioritization. By way of introduction, we're in the middle of a biennium for the general fund. So our state school fund, which is the primary source of revenue, is known. The student investment account is much improved from what we shared last year in terms of funding. Federal ESSER funds, we've received three different large pieces of legislation, and we'll go over those. We'll have 2 years remaining after this year. And most importantly, all numbers you're going to see today are based on the best information we have today. They'll change in the coming weeks and months. Okay, the general fund budget. Let's start with enrollment. Enrollment is very important because it's a primary driver of the state school fund, which is how we get revenue for the school district. We are essentially provided revenue based on the number of students we have in the district and the demographics of those students. You can see on this chart, the light green is our projection and the dark green is our actual on a year-by-year basis. Importantly, you can see our estimate for 2022-2023, which is the next school year, is just over 37,000 students. That compares to 3 years ago where we had 39,000, just over 39,000 students. That's a decline of 2,000 students in the last 3 years. What does that mean to us? 2,000 students equates to over $18 million in revenue on an annual basis. Next, let's talk about the state funding. You can see on the far right, the 21-23 biennium, we projected $9.3 billion. That's what the legislature will give us in the state school fund. Importantly, on this slide, that's a 3.3% increase from what it was in the 1921 year. And that's over a 2-year period. We are very concerned that at a 3.3% increase, that will not keep up with our costs on an annual basis moving forward, especially if inflation continues. In prior bienniums, you can see our increases have ranged from 8.8% to a 13.3%. So certainly something to keep an eye on as the legislature meets both this year in the short session and next year in the full session. Here's our general fund revenue and expenditures, just a line chart that shows you kind of where we've been and our projections moving forward. You can see the blue line is revenue, the red line is our expenditures. Early on in 17-18 and 18-19, you can see we were spending more than we were bringing in revenue. At the start of the pandemic, you can see that red line flatten out for expenditures, and that revenue continued to climb. So we were spending less than we were bringing in during those years. And in 21-22, you can see we're spending just a little bit less than what we're bringing in. We had actually budgeted that we would be spending more. The primary cause for why we're projecting to spend less this year is staffing shortages throughout the district. So, and then moving forward in future years, we project we'll be back on track and those expenditures will once again climb above revenue. Here's another similar chart that shows the same revenue and expenditure, revenue in blue and expenditures in red, but we add the fund balance to it. Since we can't deficit spend when we have a year where expenditures exceed revenue, it's got to come from somewhere, and typically that's from our financial reserves. So you can see in 2017, 2018, we had reserves of just under 30 million. You watch those over the years as we begin to spend less than we bring in, that reserve grows all the way as high as what we're estimating at 92.1 million in 21-22. And then you see in years moving forward when we're spending more than we're bringing in, it falls all the way to 21.5 million. The dashed line is our board reserve policy, so we can't fall below that. Speaking of reserves, we have two types of reserves in this district. We have the general fund ending fund balance reserve, which you see in blue, and you see what's called a generic and general financial reserve in red. This year, in the current 21-22 year, you'll see that red up at 9.3 billion. That's primarily driven by a PERS reserve that the school board created during the 2021-2022 budget year. Over time, you can see this reserve started at 50 million in 17-18, grows again all the way up to as high as 101.4 million, and then drops about to 50 million again at the end of 2024, 2025. Okay, let's talk about the student investment account. This is a fairly new source of revenue to the school district. It started during the 2020-2021 school year. I'm not going to go into great detail here. You'll see some activities listed and where we've spent some of those funds and where we plan to spend them in the future. If you'd like some more information, you can go on the Beaverton School District website, and under the Department of Accountability, you'll see a slot for improvement planning. That's where you can find more detail about the SIA budget. But generally speaking, you can see we spent $10.5 million in 2020, 2021. We plan to spend just under $31 million during the current year. And next year, we're projecting we'll receive about $32.1 million. Again, new source of revenue for the school district funded by the corporate activities tax. Federal resources over the last 18 months, we've received significant federal resources. You can see, and we've broken them up into three buckets based on the legislation that was passed. We had ESSER 1, which was worth $10.1 million to the district, and we spent that during the last school year. ESSER 2, $20.7 million, and ESSER 3, over $46 million. These are one-time funds and must be spent by the end of September 30th, 2024. Excuse me. Considerations for ESSER 2 and ESSER 3. As we created the budget and plans for ESSER 2 and 3, we used community and staff priorities that we received from you back in January of 2021. We used input for the student investment account, and we also used some of the designs of our staffing allocation methodology to help determine the priorities to provide more resources to students as we return to school this year. We also have considerations for operations. We have HVAC improvements that need to be made from these funds, and we considered those as well, along with using the equity lens through the process. Strategies, there are several, but I'll go over the top three. The number one strategy used is time and attention. The number two is relationships and mental health supports. Number three is primarily improvements to the facility and school facility repairs. Between those three, that represents over 75% of the funds. How does ESSER break out over this year and the next 2 years? We plan to spend $28.4 million this year, $28 million the following year, and $10.7 million in 2023, 2024. Importantly, again, in conversations with the school board, because these are one-time funds, we are being careful to stair-step down this amount we spend on salaries and benefits. So you'll see in year one, we're spending $18.4 million on salary and benefits. That steps down to $13.2 million in the second year and down to $6.4 million in the third year. Again, we're trying to avoid a funding cliff in terms of staffing as we use these one-time funds. In terms of ESSER funding we've received, in terms of staffing, here's how we plan to spend those dollars over the next 3 years. Again, if you want to see more detail regarding this, you can go to our website and find that in the same spot we have the SIA. But again, you can see our stair-stepping down of 154 positions in the current year, although we've only currently filled 108 of those, stepping down to 96 the next year and then down to 47 in year 3. In terms of non-salary items, you can see we spent some money on the summer learning grant during the current year. We have student devices, software, and student books and materials that we'll spend dollars on. And the largest chunk will go to COVID-19 PPE and HVAC repair projects. Upcoming key dates. So here we are in January. We're gathering input on priorities. We're reviewing staffing allocations and identifying needs for safe reopening for next year. We're also developing funding based on student need. Next month in February, we'll review all central budgets and we'll make final student investment account and ESSER adjustments. And then in March, we'll take our last shot at our final enrollment estimate, which will influence and dictate our staffing allocations to schools. We'll also in March do a budget 101 with the budget committee and get them up to speed on kind of where we're at. In May, we'll present the proposed budget. The budget committee will approve the proposed budget during the month of May. And in June, we'll bring it to the school board for budget adoption. Okay, input and prioritization. Here's where we need your help. We've just gone over the general fund, the student investment account, and those federal stimulus monies in terms of how we've initially allocated those funds, but we'd like your input in prioritization. We'll use staff and community input and the district equity lens to help determine budget priorities for the next school year. And as we ask you to weigh in and give your input, please consider our district equity lens as you give your thoughts. And those are: whose voice is and isn't represented in the decision? Who does this decision benefit or burden? Is this decision in alignment with the BSD equitable policy? And finally, does this decision close or widen the access, opportunity, and expectations gap? Thanks again for listening. And you can see on the web address listed below, you can go there to fill out a short survey that will help inform our budget for the 22-23 fiscal year. Thanks again. I look forward to speaking with you soon.